and at the same time, I have immigrant parents. And so that word lazy, I heard that a lot, like, don't be lazy, don't be lazy. And at the same time, I appreciate naming rest because, like, well, when do I rest? Shouldn't there be space for that too? And why do I feel so guilty for taking space to rest? So I really resonate with that a lot.
My name is Ashanti, and welcome to the Taking Off the Mask podcast, where men get real. Men of all ages and backgrounds come to this space to own and discuss the masks that we wear. In this work, the mask is represented by the front of the mask, the things that we gladly let the world see, and the back of the mask, the things that we don't usually let people see. Maybe you can ask yourself right now, what mask have I been wearing? What are the things that I'm talking a lot about? I'm sharing a lot with people. I'm glad to let people see about me. And what are the things that I'm not letting people see too much of? Sharing his mask today is Dr. Saed Hill. Dr. Saed is a counseling psychologist. He is assistant director of the prevention and masculine engagement at the Center for Awareness, Response, and Education at Northwestern University. In fall of 2022, Saed was tapped to advise the Biden-Harris administration's White House Gender Policy Council on how to best engage men in violence prevention. Listen, I think that what we see in our world and we see here is that we all have a role to play. And since a lot of the violence that is perpetuated is happening by men, we need to engage men in these conversations. All men are not doing it. Men should be a part of these conversations to understand why it's happening. Why are we not doing the work that we need to do to navigate our emotions in a healthy way? Because otherwise we're just waiting for the landmine to be stepped on and for them to explode. I think it's part of the work that we talk about with the masks. This work that we're talking about around these masks is about giving men space to take off these masks, to not have to wear them all the time, to find the safe places and the safe people that we can communicate with them about. He's doing that work with college students. When we discussed the idea of him being a professor, one of the things that he described was that when he has a chance, he tries and goes beyond the surface. It would be amazing to have a professor to go deeper than just what grade you got on the last test. He has a question that he likes to ask when people are willing. He says, "How is your heart today?" I mean, that it's kind of a variation of how you're doing. But when you ask somebody how you're doing, normally the form answer comes back good, fine, cool, okay, for the most part. And we know that some people are willing to go more deep. But his willingness to ask a deeper question, how is your heart today, actually would probably cause people to stop and be like, oh, wait, how do I even answer that question? How is my heart today? I mean, thank goodness I can tell that it's still beating, but how is the other part of my heart? How am I feeling for real? And I think that's so beautiful to begin thinking and rethinking how we ask that question that oftentimes gets a form answer and we keep it moving to our own directions. We hope you enjoyed today's episode with Dr. Saed Hill. I really enjoyed having this conversation with him. I enjoyed these conversations with men from all over. But as we talk about men in communities that have a high need, like Northwestern in Chicago, we have opportunities to do something in our communities to make it better. We have opportunities to have deeper conversations and to engage younger people in these conversations as well. So if you know somebody who needs to hear this conversation, please share it with them. If you are inspired by what you hear today, please give us a review on Apple or Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. And we look forward to you being a part of this movement with us. Dr. Hill and I, we share our mask here publicly, but you can do yours anonymously at millionmask.org. Thank you for listening to today's episode. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye now. Saed Hill, welcome to the Taking Off the Mask podcast. I'm really glad to have you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here with you today, Shanti. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been looking forward to this conversation, so happy to be here.
Me too, man. Will you let folks know what you want them to know about you before we jump into these masks? I was telling you that we should have probably clicked the record maybe 5 minutes ago because we had a really good kind of connecting call. But thank you for this, and I'm looking forward to checking in. Let folks know what what's important for them to know about you as we jump into these masks?
Absolutely. So I'm Saed Hill. So I'm actually a counseling psychologist over in Chicago. So I work at Northwestern University in their Center for Awareness, Response, and Education. So over there, I'm one of the assistant directors in charge of producing and developing violence prevention initiatives to support our students who have been impacted by various forms of violence, but with a specialization in promoting healthy masculinity as a means of prevention. So there, I supervise a masculinity-based student group that does anti-violence work. I also do a lot. I teach a curriculum, a course there at Northwestern on deconstructing masculinity as a means of prevention. And I do a lot of consulting work, helping other institutions with their education around things like consent, male and masculine survivorship, talking about gender-based dynamics in a workplace, for example. I do a lot of retreats, things like that. So I'm just very passionate about honestly helping people really examine masculinity regardless of gender identity and how that impacts relationships, how that impacts us in society, how that impacts policy. I'm just really passionate about this. But I think more than anything, I do this work because I just want people to feel more free. And I think, like, for a long time, I haven't always felt very free day to day. And I like feeling free, and I want other people to feel free too. And so I think I love the opportunity to be here talking to you about taking the mask off, because I think that's part of freedom right there.
Thank you for that word, freedom. You know, with this world we live in now, where we still distance wise we're far, but we can collapse distance. I saw you, I think, on LinkedIn on one of your talks, and I was like inspired, and I was like, well, let me just try. I think some of part of the work in these conversations have been, I hear someone say something that really resonates, and I say, well, hey, I'll try and reach out, and I'm glad we got to make this happen. I appreciate you for responding, because I think in this work, I think oftentimes it's easy for me to often be like, well, that person may be too busy. You go to LinkedIn
Sure.
profile, they got all this stuff, and you're like, I'm not gonna bother them. They're not
Right.
gonna. And I think I've just tried to just get a little bit more courageous. I think fear is one of these things that I wish I was fearless. But I'm really not. And I think I take on the stance of, if I could just, and I think that's going to come up as we talk about these masks. It's definitely one of my things that I don't talk much about. But I thank you for being here. And as the guest, you get to decide who goes first. So first of all, thanks for being here. And as a guest, you decide you want to go first with the mask, or you want me to go first with the mask.
Yeah.
Whatever you choose is where we go.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I would love to hear from you. Like, I'd love to have you go first before I go in there, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And today, we talked before the show. I drew with my multicolor crayon pen here, which I got in Evanston recently, and I don't know what I was drawing today, but I'll show you the mask. So here's what came up today. This is the image that showed up today. That's the mask. That's the
I
mask,
like that.
and the words today are serious, caring, and work-a-holic. I normally put hard worker on the front, and the reason I put this word here on the front is because I think that I have defaulted towards letting people see that I work like all the time, and I think that I have the counter balance of my life where if I'm not really working hard, I feel like people think I'm lazy.
Yeah.
So it's important in my mind that I'm always like doing stuff. Like, and I actually enjoy rest, but I like my body enjoys rest. Like this week, we got a big event this Saturday. Like I am like we've had some team dynamics. We had people leave and come and leave, and I mean it's just been madness. And I'm just nonstop. Like I need more help. But on the front of the mask, I think it's easier for me to show those things than to show I'm struggling. The reason I'm being a workaholic right now is not because I just love working hard right now. It's because I have nobody else right now that I could hand a lot of these things off to. But as long as I leave it in the idea of working hard, then you feel the dopamine hit some way from that too, right?
Yeah.
Oh, he's such a hard worker. But in behind the scenes, when it's at 3 in the morning, like I was up this morning trying to send out this last email. This is not 3 in the morning. I woke up early. 3 in the morning. I hadn't gone to sleep yet. Right. That's that 3 in the morning. And I was like, this is not going to be sustainable. And I think it's just, so anyway, that's the front. I'll stay at the front, but that's what I gladly let people see.
Yeah. Yeah, I really value that, and I appreciate you naming that. Especially, some of those words that feel so loaded to me, like words like lazy, but even the word rest feels very loaded for me, as well, and I appreciate you getting into this idea of wanting to be perceived a certain way, and not wanting to be perceived as lazy. And that's such a loaded word. I think that's been a loaded word a lot in my family, amongst a lot of like men and women of color in my family. That lazy moniker, and that having implications for how people perceive you, and trying to dodge those sort of descriptors, right? And at the same time, I have immigrant parents, and so that word lazy, I heard that a lot, like don't be lazy, don't be lazy. And at the same time, I appreciate naming rest, because like, well, when do I rest? Shouldn't there be space for that too? And why do I feel so guilty for taking space to rest? So I really resonate with that a lot.
Mm. I was at a museum the other day, which almost felt like I almost didn't even go. There's a exhibit, Kehinde Wiley,
Mhm.
and it's called The Archaeology of Silence.
Mm.
And it's these bodies in this museum where, like, I was listening to the audio recording of the show, but you're like, the bodies almost look like they're not alive, or are they resting? And I think that when you look at the body, you look at these images, these huge images, you're like, wow, how beautiful they are, but also, are they alive or not, right? And I think there's been a time in my own life, in my mind, that my mom hated me sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah.
Like, was allergic to people being lazy. So anytime you were not working,
Hmm.
it was because you're being lazy, right?
Yeah.
And so it's almost this moment of like, every moment you're like, okay, I just finished cleaning for 2 hours, and I finally laid on the floor and just was like, and then she's like, get it, what are you doing? You're supposed to be cleaning. And I'm like, I literally just stopped for 30 seconds.
You caught me
How?
in that 30-second window. Like, you should have just seen me. Exactly. I've had that conversation a lot too.
Oh my God. And you just like, look at my fingers. The fingers are all wrinkled. Can't you tell I've been like in water for the last 2 hours? Like,
Yeah.
but yeah. But then just like that moment of like, and I think it's a recording. It's an old recording that I still carry even as an adult. And she can't tell me nothing now. She can, because she's still, still out of respect, right? But the idea is that, but I still hear her voice in my mind sometimes, that. But anyway, that's the front, and so yeah. Now you can go first. Would you like to go do your mask, your front,
Sure, sure. Yeah, I could.
and then I'll go to the
Yeah,
back
yeah, yeah.
again?
I could do the front here. All right, here we go. So that's my mask right there. So that's supposed to be me. I gave myself that curly black hair. My beard lineup is a lot crispier and cleaner than this, but I attempted there with that beard. But and I wanted to use a little pop of orange, because that is my favorite color. So I wanted to get that color in there. I didn't want to be so black and white and darker colors there. But so my the words that I wrote here were funny, reflective, and also the word curious. So those were three words that I felt were really resonating with me today. About what I let people see. I think before we recorded, we were talking a little bit about upbringing and where we're from, and I was reflecting on, I'm from a lot of different places. I was born in India, but I was adopted by a family in New York City, and then I was around a lot of people who looked like me in New York City and Queens. My family's Indo-Caribbean. We're a Guyanese family. My father is an Indo and Afro-Guyanese man. My family are Indo-Guyanese people for the most part. And my parents got transferred. My dad, in particular, his job, he got transferred when I was a child to the suburbs of Atlanta, where we then were quickly, I was one of only in school, for example. Not many people looking like me, a lot of people wondering who I was, where I was from. I just didn't look like anybody else from that area. Just just predominantly white. And I think the funny thing was something that I kind of discovered early for myself, where it kind of helped me disarm a little bit the curiosities about myself, the ways that I sort of stood out. in a lot of places and spaces. It was sort of like, the funny guy. He's helpful. We want to get to know the funny guy. And so being funny kind of became a connector for me. It became something that felt natural for me. I like people laughing. I like people smiling, but it helped me feel safer as well. And so it's something that was sort of adaptable for me, I feel like, early on in my life, that I really do value about myself now, because I love laughing and I love helping other people laugh and lightening the mood. I've heard you talk about that before on this podcast, that disarming, lightening the mood a little bit. And I know you tied it at times to your physical appearance, being a bigger man. And for me, you can't see me, but like you haven't met me in person, but I'm an extremely short man. So I'm 5'3", 5'10" on a good day, And so it was one of those things where growing up, I also stood out in that way. This brown kid named Saed in a very white area in the South, who's really short and potentially a really easy target in some way. So humor, I think, became a part of me at that front. So I love people vibing with the humor. I also love people knowing or seeing this reflective nature of me. I'm very contemplative. I think really deeply about things, and I process a lot. It's almost all up here sometimes, and I think that's what I struggle with, is getting it down, externalizing it a little bit so I can see it in front of me instead of being consumed by it. But I love that about myself, and I like people noticing that. I like that people can maybe notice that I'm really being intentional about my time with them, that I'm reflecting about our time together, reflecting on them as people when I talk to them. And that's friends, that's family, that's strangers. I really do care. Like, I'm one of those people, when I ask, like, how are you doing? I don't mind how you answer that question. Like, tell me what's going on. I value that and I care about that. And the last one is curiosity, that curiousness. I feel like that's just a characteristic I really value a lot about myself. And I like other people to see that I like asking questions. I like knowing things, information. I don't necessarily like to quickly judge. I want to understand why people make decisions that they make, how they think about things. How are they unique in how they think about things? And so these are all three ways that I feel like I like to connect to people as humans. And I really love people seeing that about me.
I resonate with so many of those things. The one that stood out to me is when you said, like, people know that I'm intentional about how I spend time with them, that I'm curious, that when I ask how you're doing, I really want people to answer. And I think that's a question we ask in our work a lot, around how are you doing? What is your go-to answer? And most people have a go-to answer, right? And I imagine it shocks people when you actually are waiting for more than a one-word answer when you ask how you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've had some curious looks before, where sometimes I might call some folks out if I have the time, right? Like, where I ask, I'm sort of like, how are you doing? And some people say, oh, I'm good. Things are fine. And I'll say, oh, that's really convincing. Yeah, but hear it. Just like, maybe I just point it out, lighten the mood a little bit, especially around work. But I think that's what I feel a lot is where I think people are conditioned to just engage in these pleasantries. But I think I found that people feel really good and feel really seen when folks actually care about that question. And sometimes I change it up. I don't always ask how you're doing. I might ask a friend, and I start asking each other, how is our heart today? Where's your heart at today? How's your heart today? And just things just to kind of change up that kind of question. But I feel like people really do. I mean, some people might be a little like, whoa, that's interesting. You actually want to hear more about it. But I feel like people want to be seen, and they want to allow themselves to be seen too, and feel safe and comfortable with that. And so I love those interactions, especially when I can kind of, I don't know, poke around a little bit and just ask, just show that curiosity if people are willing to go there and talk about some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine that makes you a great professor, right? Because I think definitely on the college level and the student level, even as a mentor, right? Like, to know that this person is not only caring enough, but they're actually listening, and they're willing to know more, right? I think most people, the pleasantries are oftentimes trying to create that interaction to be frictionless, right? It's like, oh, okay, they're busy, I'm busy, we're moving. Okay, how you doing? Fine, good. Okay, good. And we keep moving. There's no friction in that. But if somebody like changes up the formula, then the question begins to like, whoa, you actually asking me, you telling me real stuff right now. I didn't have time for real, so I had time for 2-word answer, maybe 3, and then you keep it moving, right? And I think, we may have, we've got trained in that. We got trained that what are the answers that keep people disarmed, and what are the answers that kind of arm people up, right? And I think that's part of the work too. So, all right, I was missing one word on the back, and I think I have the word now. So let me go to the back. You ready for the back?
Ready to go.
So I put fear
Mm,
of losing mom. I put worry. And I think the third one that I don't talk much about is like that I really try and I really want to make an impact in this world with people and their well-being.
yeah,
I really have a deep desire to like leave the world better than I found it, and I don't have kids, and so sometimes I feel like I'm not leaving enough of a legacy, right? And I think that feeling is it's one of those feelings that it gets me every time. Like if I'm thinking about like how hard I've been working, started helping raise my siblings at a young age. I mean, I was changing diapers at 7, 8 years old, right? I'm like
yeah,
formula, baby, like
early,
I'm
yep.
done with I'm done with the baby smell. I don't need to smell it. I don't need any right. Those things are like
Yeah,
deeply so it's like but in my mind, like I want when I look at my family tree, we have a family tree. After my name, it's gonna stop. And I feel some deep, I'll say sadness. That's probably the best word. Sometimes I think I'm trying to always make a good impression. And sometimes the good impression is I keep it all together all the time, but sometimes it's just like in a moment of just like, when do I navigate these feelings? When do I deal with this? When do I address this? And there's no way to address it. I mean, I'm not gonna just go out and make a baby somewhere, right? Like
hmm
that's not the answer, right? But I feel that the conflict in my soul, like, what does it mean to like to be after Ashanti branch on this family tree? There's no more branches.
yeah,
And so I didn't think I was gonna talk about that today, but yeah, that's
yeah.
where it came up.
Yeah. Do you mind me asking a question about that? Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure.
I'm kind of curious. I haven't heard many people like maybe answer. So I do this mask. I've been doing masks for a lot of my students for years myself. Probably about 2017, doing a mask exercise with my students and with men I work with, and I haven't heard that as many. What you just shared there, and I'm sure that that's real for a lot of us. And so I'm kind of curious, maybe what was allowing for you to connect to that today. As opposed to maybe some other times. Like, is there something about today? I'm just kind of curious how that comes up for you because I don't always connect with it the way I know it's there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I left it blank when I was making the mask, and in my mind I thought I was gonna spend more time talking about the fear of losing my mom because there was this a guy who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago. He has an organization in Mexico called Tu vida es increíble, like your life is incredible, and he had a thing called fear. In Spanish is miedos de miércoles, so Wednesday fears.
Mm,
And so he asked me to participate yesterday, and it was like about midnight, and I was like, still hadn't done the recording of like what I'm afraid of,
yeah,
and then I made the recording, and I was like, I'm afraid of losing my mom, and I think that's what I thought I was going to talk about right now, and I think in my mind I left the third one blank because I was like, well, maybe something's going to come up in the conversation, and as we started talking, we start talking about like this qualities of yourself that you make available to people, like making time for them. Like I do that for all the young men who I mentor, right?
definitely.
I make they know that some of them will hesitate to like reply to my messages because they know that I'm gonna ask some real questions, right? They know that I'm not gonna like I'm not gonna waste their time, but I'm also not gonna just be like, oh, everything's great, okay, good to text with you real quick, right?
Sure.
I'm gonna just say, how are you feeling? How's your heart, right?
Yeah.
And so when I thought about what I was gonna put it for that third one, I was like, I've had the opportunity to mentor a lot of young people and young men in my life, and I feel like I was so for some who don't have fathers, who have fathers who are just and I get to just be a present. I get to be a mentor, a friend, right? But I sometimes I miss that. That's I guess if I have the right language for it, it's just it's a friendship relationship, right? After it all boils down to it, it's over, right? It's not a and so I think like not having a child, I think it was like what am I? Do I feel this emptiness? Is it feeling like an emptiness that I need to fix, or is it something I need to just resolve in my mind that I've chosen to give my life to this mission? Right
Right.
to this mission is where I've chosen to leave. My legacy is not going to look like a person who then has another person and another person, and that's not going to be. So that's when I was like deciding if I was going to talk about it. I didn't know that it was going to charge me up, and
Yeah.
then as I started saying it, the emotions started rising up. So I realized that it was actually what I was probably avoiding,
Yeah.
and I probably am avoiding it in most of my conversations. I don't talk about it a whole lot
Yeah.
ever. Yeah, that was me trying to like in the moment. What is the thing I don't really talk much about, and this what? is what came up first as the thing I probably don't want to talk about because I know it's going to make me start emoting. So maybe start crying. And I always ask myself, am I crying too much on this freaking show? Like, what's wrong with you, Ashanti? You're the host. Like, what's wrong? But I also realize that I'm not here to be a host. I'm here to have a conversation with someone. And what if we could have more real conversations with people? So I think that's what brought it to the surface right now.
No, I appreciate you breaking it down, and yeah, it just struck me as such a beautifully authentic moment, and I just really appreciated you just having it, yeah, in this moment. And I think I've struggled a lot from like a therapeutic standpoint of being like a therapist or a clinician. You know, how much am I crying or being sort of just wondering like, oh, am I making this about me, or is this too much crying, or is this too much emotion? And I remember for a long time I didn't cry with my clients even when I felt like it. You know, I didn't cry with other people even when I felt like I was there. And it was kind of like I needed permission from some supervisors who finally told me, like, well, Saeed, why don't you just cry? Like, you're not crying too much. Like, name it. You know, you can share that with somebody you're supporting, and you know, a client, and that's an authentic moment, a human moment. But just talk about it, name it, and you don't always have to run from it. But it was a lot of like my own masculinity stuff, a lot of, you know, my own models for this, which I lacked, models around emoting and the range of emotions. And so, yeah, I could tell that it was something for you. And I just like love that you were in it. I just appreciate seeing that, you know, folks in it. So, yeah,
Yeah. Thank you for asking. Thank you for asking.
yeah.
I appreciate it. Yeah. That's what I said when I was saying it. I was like, I didn't plan to talk about this. What's going on right here? Right? Like it was,
Right,
it wasn't on my agenda. That wasn't on my agenda.
right, right.
But the beauty, and I appreciate it for asking, and it makes me reflect on what was it, like why, and it's hard to talk about, right? It's hard to talk about. It's hard to talk about in a society that continues to remind you or tell you that, oh, well, what? You're not married? What's wrong with you, right? What you don't got kids? What's wrong with you? You're like 40 something. What is going on? You know? And I think one of my friends from college, his daughter just graduated high school. So like even that recently, and I celebrated that post. I was like, oh, I'm so happy for my little niece, my little
Hmm.
niece. And then I was like, man, Chauncey, if you just started back then, you could already had a college graduate, right?
I know,
No,
right?
she graduated college. She graduated college. I'm like, you waited too
It's
late,
so wild.
and then
Yeah,
so those are those back behind the scenes conversations that are only with myself.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of, you know, because in a lot of ways you're naming, even, you know, you touched on some of that fear with your mom too, and it just like some of these existential things that come up for us, and like meaning of life and all this other things. And you know, what I really appreciate about what you're naming is some of that worry. I'm, you know, so I'm 35. I have no children, and I have many friends, you know, who are now having kids. I have some friends who do have high school graduate, you know, kids now, and I have no kids as of yet, and that's, you know, been fine. But I can't help but compare, you know, because when you start to look around and you're, you know, I'm doing a lot of great work. I know I'm feeling really connected. I'm doing some mentorship, and I know I'm helping, being helpful to folks, and I'm helping myself as well through the process. But I can't help with sometimes that voice that's like, well, you're not doing it the way that it's supposed to be done. Right? This is the model for how it's supposed to be. This is what your parents did, their parents did. This is what your friends are doing around you. And when you see that happening, I know for me, I can feel, oh, am I on the right path? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? But also that feels also very rigid, because I think it's hard for me to remind myself sometimes that it's okay to be flexible and arrive to whatever conclusions you need to in your own way on your own timeline. You know, you're not on, yeah, that whole thing about the comparisons being the thief of joy or happiness or whatever. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, you just said that. That's the word. That's probably the word that deep down is where the roots in, right? It roots in, and this is the graduation season, right? So it's a graduation season. So I'm seeing a lot of those things happen. Oh, I didn't even name that. That's actually, thank you. Actually, I was wondering why I was so fresh, right? Because I'm always celebrating them. I mean, these are kids who I met when they were babies, some of them, right? Or I've watched them grow up on my friends' social media, right? And then you realize behind the scenes, behind my celebration of their graduation or their next accomplishment is that, oh, wait a minute. Um, and that's where it is. That's where, and it is a underlying comparison that I didn't even have that as the word, but yeah, that's probably deep down where some of the call to attention of it is at.
For sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Thank you.
That's cool.
Thank you for that.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for that moment and those moments. Yeah, I value that. I don't know. Are we ready
Ready?
for mine, I guess? Or should we go
Yeah,
into mine?
absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
So here are my three here that I have here. So if folks can see here, but I have the word lonely right there. I also have the word numbing right there, and I also have more of a phrase, but not enough. Right there, I went with those three. Yeah, what do I don't let people see? I mean, I think that's always an interesting question because it's also like these are the three things I don't allow myself to feel or see. It's the stuff I run from. You know, you're talking about running from some stuff. I run from these feelings. You know, I can come across as very self assured. I think confident, and I am those things at times. And I think that's what's hard for me is like just because I'm not confident sometimes or I feel lonely sometimes doesn't mean that I'm not a confident person. And I think I'm in this black and white thinking all or nothing feeling a lot, which is so rigid and keeps me feeling anxious, you know, but I do feel lonely. I think it's been hard. I haven't always felt like I fit in with some of the uniqueness, not just how I look, but where I come from and the family stories. You know, when I tell people I'm from Guyana, I had a lot of people just saying, oh, like thought I was making fun of being like a guy from like a random country. Like, oh, because you're a guy, you're from Guyana. You know, people, you know, and it's hard when people don't see that, don't know you, and maybe don't um know how to ask or get to know you without being offensive to you or microaggressing against you or other things, you know, people trying to connect to me by saying namaste right away. It's like, no, we don't need to do that. You know, we can go a different direction with that. But sometimes I could feel very lonely and isolated. I think I was also raised as sort of an only child. I mean, I have two older sisters, but they were teenagers when I came around, when my parents adopted me. And so I was sort of on my own a lot too, sort of working things out. And so I could feel that loneliness. What I don't love people seeing either is just the amount that I numb. You know, I think as someone, even as a psychologist and as somebody who does this work, you know, does healthy masculinity work and helps people process emotions and all these things, I take for granted, you know, you've reminded me of this like workaholic thing where I've been told so many times by friends, like, oh, you're really busy. And I'm like always like off to another workshop. I'm doing a trauma appointment. I'm helping somebody else, emergency appointments here and there, or I'm like, you know, consulting work, like, oh, I'm really dedicating my time to this client I have, all of this stuff. But like what's underneath sometimes that is like me masking against like maybe my own vicarious trauma. Like I do trauma work and I'm not always aware of how that's impacting my brain and how I need to heal. And meanwhile, sometimes I've been in the past up until like 3 a.m., ruminating, anxious, you know, and wondering, which goes to my third one, not enough. Am I enough? Um, and noticing that I'm numbing and wanting to like remove myself from this reality, this pain sometimes, this loneliness, this isolation. I feel that. And then I feel like I'm not enough because like, oh, you should know better, Saeed. You know, you do this. Why aren't you better at this? And whose voice is that? This perfectionism and just uncaring, you know, sometimes for myself. Um, and I don't love people seeing that, and I don't love seeing it. And so sometimes I avoid. And I think what was really interesting, and I'll just make this point quickly about, like, say, the pandemic, for example, is that you know through all that tragedy and everything that happened, what that was, and especially during the time also with Black Lives Matter, and there was a lot of anti-Asian hate. There was just like the tumultuousness of that 2020 sort of realm. Um, but I also saw people just slowing down, you know, I saw people were breaking bread. I saw people, joining book clubs. I saw people finding art and trying to find meaning in a slowed down world. And I thought there was beauty in that because I feel like for me, at least, I think I'm in a constant state of urgency a lot. You know, I do intense work and I don't always find the time. And then here I am numbing and feeling like not enough. What's going on with that? And I feel like there's just tremendous value in slowing down um, and not having to like our brains don't work in a constant state of urgency and hypervigilance. We need to heal. And so I'm not always doing the best job of that, but that's something that I really do value and continue to try my best to address those sorts of things.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Mass, brother. I appreciate it. A- and when I think about the words you said about the trauma work and how all the things that happened in 2020, and then people slowing down and people breaking bread. But I think one of the things that came up to me as you were saying that was, and sometimes that slowing down almost for me feel like, Ashanti, what's happening here? Like, during the pandemic is when I learned about, I think her name is Trisha Hersey.
Hmm.
She has a Instagram called the Nap Ministry.
Yes, I follow that mystery. Yep.
Yeah, and I remember when I first saw one of the posts someone sent me, whatever the words were on, I don't remember what the word said, but whatever it was right for me, and it was like, "Oh, that's a new way to think about it." Right? Like, it's a constant reminder that we've been taught that to slow down, that to rest is a laziness. And if we're trying to protect ourselves from the judgment of others, and we're trying to protect ourselves from the narrative of white supremacy in the world that says if you want to get ahead, you must work hard. And even though you've worked 15 hours already today, still not enough. It's not like there's like propaganda machines playing out in the street telling you this. It just gets ingrained in you by these subtle and powerful and influential ways. And if we're not careful, we adopt it. We adopt it. And I think that I have adopted some of those things. I've adopted a very much a self-hate kind of narrative that I can't be like this. And so therefore it means I gotta work more and more, which means I'm not resting, which means I'm not at the full best of myself at all times because I'm running on fumes, right? And I think that those are the things that constantly come up. And so when you said that, and I really appreciated that. And yeah, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I think a lot of these messages about productivity and we get into things like white supremacy and capitalism and but just systems. I think all we're talking about are systems that maybe sometimes contribute to us not feeling like we're enough. I feel like it's such a miracle being a human being, like just trying to navigate this world and like I don't know. And we take that for granted, I think, so much, just surviving all of this in a society that isn't always designed to help us cope and heal. We have to find those locations. Like I get resentful when I hear, like, for example, I once was asked to come in and do education with a bunch of master's level students who are teachers in training. And they wanted me to come in and talk to them about being burnout culture. Like, how do address being burnt out? And when I went in there and I kind of heard about their conditions and what it was like for them teaching and training right now during the pandemic, I said, you're putting so much blame on yourself for your burnout and what you need to do to not be burned out when it sounds like you're being exploited, right? Like it sounds like sometimes we're sitting here being exploited, like our emotions, our time, our energy. Sometimes we're being exploited, and maybe it's not, and maybe sometimes it is environmental. It's not always on us. And I think sometimes we live in a society that always says, well, what are you doing wrong? And it's not to say that you can't take personal accountability or responsibility, absolutely. But I think there's systems that also need to kind of take some of that accountability for how it contributes to this feeling, And so I encourage folks to maybe rest. But I also know I can judge that. I judge myself sometimes. I can judge others for not doing enough sometimes. And I have to recommit myself to like humanity sometimes. Be like, well, this isn't human to feel this sometimes. Like we need to rest. We need to connect differently, and not always be chasing some unattainable goal that feels really rigid. And the last thing I'll say about it, actually, with my job, a lot of my work in the past, I'm doing masculinity work, and I'm often maybe the only male or masculine aligned sort of person at a specific job. Right now in trauma work at Northwestern, I'm the only man that's doing this work at this particular department. I used to work in reproductive justice and rights, like where I was the a face, sort of doing work around that in education and outreach as the only man or male. And I think what I struggle a lot with, especially this year, is when I need a rest, when I need to slow down, when I need to address my own mental health, my own trauma, so much guilt comes up because then I'm taking the break. But like, here are maybe these women I work with, these femme identifying folks I work with, these women of color I work with who are doing this labor and who have been doing this and live it in a way that I don't. And then, oh, who am I to slow down? Who am I to tag out? But that's also like sort of almost this white supremacist sort of mentality for me, where I was like, no, actually, all of us should be able to take our time and our space to rest. And why, when they're resting, I'm tagged in, but then sometimes I'm going to need rest too. And maybe I'm tagging in Ashanti because he's been resting, and now he's back in. But we don't always have to be constantly tagged in and hyper vigilant. We need to have a different system for this. And so I think I've been challenging myself a lot about my own rigidity and my own guilt and my own shame that sometimes is centered around my masculinity and other parts of my identity.
Ooh. Well, I do this work around mask, but also, I'm an old school wrestling fan,
Same.
and I
Same. Talk
and,
to me. Talk to me.
and when you talked about tagging me in,
Yep.
you remember some of those matches and old school matches where when the partners weren't really that tight, and when you like tag me in and you're like, I'm not tagging you in, so I tag myself in. Like I slap you on the back and I'm like, get out, I'm coming in. And I wonder if how many people would benefit if they had people in their life like that, who's like, you know what, actually I'm tagging you out because I'm gonna come in and help in this moment. Like I know you're willing to do it by yourself. I know that you are telling yourself you have to do it by yourself. I know that you are like in the mindset that you have to do it all by yourself, but you don't. And so actually I'm tagging you out, right? And there may be a battle in that conversation. There may be a battle in a conversation where you're going to be upset with me that I'm going to tell you something that I believe is true and real, and you may not agree, and we don't have to agree, but I'm gonna show you how much I care, that I'm not gonna let you suffer at this by yourself,
Yeah. Yeah. I have tremendous love for, I had a mentor in Kansas City named Dr. Lynette Sparkman Barnes, who used to talk about rest and sort of like that as part of the resistance too. Like, we got to chill a little bit, right? And you hear that from different spaces in our intersectional, feminist works and stuff. Just these things about resistance and rest and what goes into that and what comes out of rest, what can be born out of rest. And I think like sometimes I feel like I have so many ideas about like how I want to do this masculinity work in more innovative ways or just human ways, connected ways. But I'm so, sometimes feeling exploited or burnt out by like having to fight so many other battles and put out so many fires and be so reactive as opposed to being really proactive and create. And I think sometimes it is because we're all just tagged in. It's like a battle royal. We're all in the ring at the same time, right? And when there's not enough space for all of us, we gotta like maybe some of us could be outside, and wait our turn, get in there. Like it's stagger it. But how powerful it is to notice that in a colleague or in a friend or someone, just say like, hey, I got you right now. Maybe you can rest a little bit and give people that permission and model that permission. Because I didn't always see good models of permission to slow down for my family, my parents. It was always grinding, but do we always have to do it this way? Maybe we can divest from that and do it a little differently.
Let's do it. That's what I want these conversations to be, is a way for men and for everyone. I mean, I think like to see how we can do it differently. What would it be like to know that we had a conversation with a friend or with somebody that we could maybe go a little bit more than just how's the weather and what's your favorite team and what's the weather, like what do you do for work? Like all the answers and questions we ask each other in this structure that says, I can't talk about real stuff in this conversation, right? For protection, for safety, for worry, for doubt, for fear that this will be judged, right? And I think, I think maybe one question I want to ask you just as we get ready to wrap this up is, in the work you do with masculinity and also in psychology, I wonder, I guess the question is coming from a place of like, I have a lot of schools who oftentimes, when we talk about the work we're going to do with their students, like I find the adults are more afraid than the kids. The adults are like, well, what are you going to do after students make these masks? And I'm like, this is the way they ask the question. So what are you going to do after you've opened them up and made them tell you all this stuff? And I'm like, well, it's anonymous. I'm not making them tell me anything. I'm not asking them to harm themselves by writing 3 words on this card. I'm giving them room. And if you believe that somehow I have some magic that I'm gonna like unveil something that it's never not from the intent place, but if in 1 hour I'm able to do that and you've been with them for 8 months and no one has done that for them, then what does that mean? I try to do it from a gentle place of a collegial space, but also like they get so afraid that they think that because kids, if they talk about it, then they first have to fix it, one, and two, that if they don't let them talk about it, then it doesn't really exist. As a person who's working in this masculinity space, but also working in this wellness space of people in their own well-being, what are your experience with people either resisting to have people talk about stuff, or saying that if they don't talk about it, then it's going to just go away. We don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. I think the best example of that is when I do, an activity called the Man Box activity, which you probably, know very well, right? And it's like a pretty seminal activity in this space of masculinity work. But essentially asking people like what it means to be a real man, and listing some of those stereotypes. And I use that as a way to help people unrestrict masculinity. I use that term, unrestricting masculinity or restrictive masculinity. That's how I describe it, as opposed to toxic masculinity. So I think, on one hand, though, part of it is my language choice, because I think that tends to be a little disarming for folks, because people, I think, a lot of the parents, use that for example, that I work with, and some of these older adults I work with, are concerned that maybe I am just like teaching boys. I'll just use that example in this binary way, like boys to kind of hate themselves or mistrust themselves as men or as boys. Masculinity is toxic and it's an issue and a problem. We don't want you teaching them that. Well, that's not what I'm teaching folks. What I'm teaching folks is that masculinity isn't inherently toxic, but it can be, the way we use it, very restrictive. And when you're restrictive with not a lot of options to unrestrict, that's where the anxiety, the depression, all that thing comes in. So let's provide options for masculinity. Let's provide models, permission to be different and show up differently in your masculinity. So we're not, trying to try to shame you in it, and try to get you to be what we want you to be, right? Or society wants you to be. So part of it is the way I show up in the conversation is a way that's more disarming for folks. Like, this isn't nefarious. I'm a man, and I identify as parts of me that are very masculine, and that's okay. But how do I use that? And do I have range with that? Right? Can I choose to like have range with that, because that's what's going to be really helpful, because we're human beings. We're not just men and mass folks. We're human beings, right? And we need that range to be helpful to us. So that's one hand. The other hand is talking to a lot of parents. I get so much pushback from a lot of adults, guardians, parents, about helping their children understand, like, to be more vulnerable, especially with my young boys of color, because they're like, Saed, they're already so susceptible in society to some XYZ, right? Targets on their backs, and it's just it can be so dangerous for them. If you're teaching them to be vulnerable, they're already vulnerable to society. That can be so harmful. And what I tell them is like, that message, I can hear that message, but I also help sometimes them explore, like, where's that coming from? That's your own fear, right? That's your own anxiety that could be real. And I get that. But these kids are going to need a space for that, to process that, to be more human, and not to always have to mask up. Because if they don't have that, where are they going to do it? And if they can't do it with their own parents, their own mothers, their own fathers, where are they getting it from? If you don't want me to be doing it with them either, because they absolutely need that outlet to process, to learn that emotional intelligence, and just pretending like it's not there doesn't address that they're really still experiencing this anxiety potentially, right? And still receiving these messages. I had a friend who has a nephew, or I call him my nephew, but he used to love to paint his nails when he was a kid, like a little kid. And as he started to get older, he was probably like 5, 6, he stopped. And his parents asked him, well, why? And he said, well, I don't feel comfortable anymore, at school, with how the boys talk to me and stuff, and how some of the girls talk to me. And some of the adults, teachers talk to me, and it's so little. We talk about this hidden curriculum all the time, and what are we learning in school? We project so many rigid values onto our kids. And so I try to really talk to parents about that, about their own fears, where is that coming from, and show them, hey, this outlet is a safer outlet to do it this way, because you don't want to see what the alternatives can potentially be, because the alternatives can be very destructive. So let's curtail this. Let's funnel this in a more positive direction and a healthier direction through modeling and permission and love. Yeah.
I can't wait to go to a retreat with you. Maybe we can create a retreat. I think like I've been envisioning what it would look like in this work to like what you're talking about, those boys, and I've seen it happen to boys in second grade who have best friends who eat lunch together, and they're and other boys, bigger boys, are coming and telling them, oh, you're gay.
Hmm.
And these second grade boys don't even know what that word means. And they're like, what does that mean? But they can feel the energy from the words. They
Yeah.
don't even know what the words mean, but they know that, that's something, that seems something like is wrong
And what
here.
do they
But all I'm
associate
doing is
that with
having,
now? Yep. Hmm.
that's right. And I think the work that the parents are like, well, I don't want my boy to be picked on. I don't want him to be bullied, but I also want him to be his kind, loving self. And so how much do we have to chase out all other parts of their humanity, of their being, to be who people need us to be, which means being very restrictive in who I can be. I can't be too nice. I can't be too kind. I can't be too caring.
And
And then we become monsters.
yeah, yeah, and we're not. This is about being
And we're
humans,
not.
and these parents, sometimes it is that they didn't get the permission, and maybe they were punished when they were vulnerable, and now they realize like, hey, now I got to raise my kids that way too. But hey, we're different adults. This is a different situation, and you don't have to be that child anymore. You can be for that child what you needed when you were their age, right? And we could do that now. And we could do that differently. That's how healing happens. And generationally how healing happens, right? Culture change and shift. Absolutely.
Man, Saeed, okay. Look, this is part one, because we're not done. But we got to be done right now,
Yes,
because I got to respect your time. But listen,
absolutely.
um, how about you just tell folks, if there's places where you want people to follow your work or what you do, if there's things you're up to coming up next, will you let folks know, and we'll put this all in the show notes, and then this is just the beginning.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I'm super excited. I really want to go more, but I want to. We're gonna plan some time to get back into a
I
conversation
love
about
that.
this.
I love this energy. We could keep going to, I know, no, we have time, but like, I love that the energy is here. So, yeah, I mean, there's a couple different examples for folks, to find me. I mean, you could just Google me, here's some of my talks, lectures, things like that I've been on. And that's just, my name's Saed. So S is in Sam, A is in Apple, E is an elephant, D is a dinosaur, last name Hill, Hill. I haven't met any other Saed Hill, so if you Google that name, that's probably me that you'll find. But I'm also on Instagram at Papercut Rhymes PhD. So just how it sounds, Papercut Rhymes PhD. We could talk about that another time. I used to like ghostwrite for hip hop artists to help put myself through college, so it was a little stage name. Um, but yeah, you can find me there, and LinkedIn too. Just my name. Find me on LinkedIn. So if you also want to visit a site, I think you could go to it's part of this consulting group that I'm part of called Dynamic Cooperative. So you could go to dynamiccooperative.com, and it's a group of us, colleagues of mine, that do a lot of amazing just workshops for different organizations around just identity, workplace culture, DEI work, those sorts of things. I do a lot of that healthy masculinity work, and there's a lot of like deconstructing whiteness work that goes along there too. So yeah, dynamiccooperative.com, really great work going on over there as well.
Dr. Saed Hill, it has been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I'm excited for the next one. I'm excited for this one and for the next one. Folks, thank you. Dr. Hill and I, Saed, we made our mask publicly.
Yes.
But you can do yours anonymously at millionmask.org. And we'll put all his common text in the show notes. We look forward to you all being a part of this movement with us. Tell somebody about this conversation. We'll see you soon. Bye now. Taking Off the Mask podcast is produced by Ryan Louie and graphics by Kelly Wong. Guests are managed by Dan Paloma, and the podcast is edited by Samuel Matingo. We'd like to thank everyone who's been a part of the creation of this podcast, and for every guest that has been a part of the show, you are now a part of the Taking Off the Mask family. The Taking Off the Mask podcast is brought to you by the Ever Forward Club, and if you like what you've heard today, please subscribe, write a 5-star review, and share this with someone. We look forward to having more conversations that matter. And please remember, there is more to you than anybody can see by just looking at you.